Sarah Chen stepped off the military transport bus at Naval Base San Diego, her civilian clothes making her blend in with the crowd of family members and visitors. She deliberately chose to dress down for her first day. Faded jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and worn sneakers. Her long black hair was loose around her shoulders instead of the regulation bun she typically wore. At 28, she had worked hard to earn her position, but today she wanted to observe the base dynamics, without the immediate recognition that came with her uniform and rank insignia. The morning California sun beat down on the concrete as she made her way toward the administrative building. She had arrived 3 days early, wanting to get a feel for the base before officially taking command. Her predecessor, Admiral Morrison, had warned her about the tight-knit community and some resistance to change, especially from the senior enlisted personnel who had been stationed there for years. As she walked past the commissary, she noticed a group of 5 sailors gathered near the entrance. They were clearly off-duty, dressed in civilian clothes, but their military bearing was unmistakable. The leader appeared to be a tall, muscular man in his mid-30s with closely cropped brown hair and a cocky smile. His name tag from the previous day's observation read, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. "Look what we have here," Webb said loudly as Sarah approached, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Fresh meat." Sarah kept walking, pretending not to hear, but she slowed her pace slightly to listen to their conversation. She had dealt with this type of behavior before in her career, and she knew the importance of understanding the social dynamics before making any moves. "Probably some officer's daughter," said another sailor, a shorter man with red hair. "Bet she's never seen the inside of a real ship." Webb stepped forward, blocking Sarah's path to the building entrance. "Hey there, princess. You lost? The mall's about 10 miles that way." He pointed in the opposite direction while his friends chuckled behind him. Sarah stopped and looked up at him calmly. She had learned long ago that the first impression in these situations often set the tone for everything that followed. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied in a steady voice. "Is that right?" Webb's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "And where exactly do you think you need to be?" "Getting to the administrative building for my appointment," Sarah said, stepping to the side to go around him. Webb moved to block her again, this time with less subtlety. "See, here's the thing about this base, little girl. We don't take kindly to outsiders who think they can just waltz in here and act like they own the place. This isn't some college campus where daddy's money gets you whatever you want." The other sailors had formed a loose semicircle around them now, clearly enjoying the show. Sarah noticed that several other personnel had stopped to watch, some looking uncomfortable but none intervening. She filed away mental notes about each face, particularly those who seemed to approve of Webb's behavior. "I understand this is your base," Sarah said carefully. "And I respect that. I'm just trying to get to my appointment." "Your appointment?" The red-haired sailor laughed. "What? You applying for a job in the gift shop?" Webb crossed his arms over his chest. "Or maybe you're here to visit your boyfriend. Got yourself a Navy boy, do you? Let me guess. Some junior officer who promised to show you around his big, important ship." Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but kept her expression neutral. In her years of service, she had encountered this exact scenario more times than she cared to count. The assumption that any young woman on base was either a dependent or a romantic interest rather than a service member in her own right was frustratingly common. "Something like that," she said finally, deciding that explaining her actual purpose would only escalate the situation unnecessarily. Webb's eyes lit up with what he clearly thought was triumph. "I knew it. Listen, sweetheart, let me give you some free advice. The Navy isn't a playground for little girls with romantic fantasies. These men have serious jobs to do, and they don't need distractions from civilians who watch too many movies and think military life is glamorous." "The military isn't glamorous," Sarah agreed quietly. "It's hard work that requires dedication, sacrifice, and respect for the chain of command. Oh, you know about the chain of command, do you? Webb leaned down closer to her face. Then you should understand that I've been on this base for 8 years. I know every officer, every sailor, every civilian contractor who belongs here, and you, little girl, definitely don't belong here. Sarah took a small step back, not from intimidation, but to create space. She could see that the situation was drawing more attention, and she noticed a few junior sailors watching nervously from across the parking lot. This was exactly the kind of moment that could define relationships for months or years to come. "Maybe I should just go," she said, testing how far they would push this. "Now you're talking sense," Webb said with satisfaction. "Tell you what, though. Since I'm feeling generous today, why don't you give me your boyfriend's name? I'll make sure to let him know that his little girlfriend needs to learn some manners before she comes around here again." The other sailors laughed appreciatively at what they saw as Webb's magnanimous offer. Sarah could see that they viewed this as a routine intimidation of an unwelcome outsider, probably something they had done before with other civilians they deemed inappropriate for their base. "That's very thoughtful of you," Sarah said, her tone remaining level. "But I think I can handle my own conversations." Webb's expression darkened slightly. "See, that attitude right there is exactly the problem. You civilians come in here thinking you know how things work, but you don't understand the first thing about military discipline or respect." "You might be surprised," Sarah replied. "I doubt that very much." Webb looked her up and down dismissively. "Let me paint you a picture of how this really works. This base operates on discipline, hierarchy, and earned respect. Every single person here has gone through training, has proven themselves, has earned their place. You're just some random girl who probably thinks the military is exciting because of what you've seen in movies." Sarah listened carefully, noting not just Webb's words, but the body language and expressions of the other sailors. Some seemed fully committed to his perspective, while others looked slightly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. "The men and women on this base," Webb continued, warming to his subject, "wake up at 0500 hours every day. They train in conditions you couldn't imagine. They deploy for months at a time, missing birthdays and holidays and family emergencies. They put their lives on the line for this country, while people like you sit safely at home and take it all for granted." "That's true," Sarah said simply. "Service members do sacrifice a lot." "Damn right we do." Webb's chest puffed out with pride. "So when some civilian shows up here acting like she belongs, like she has any right to be in our space, it's disrespectful to everything we've worked for." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I can see how that would be frustrating." Her calm agreement seemed to throw Webb off his rhythm slightly. He had clearly expected more defensiveness or anger. "Well, good. As long as you understand that." "I do understand," Sarah said. "I understand that you've all worked hard to earn your positions here. I understand that you take pride in your service and your base, and I understand that you want to protect both from people who don't belong." Webb nodded approvingly, apparently thinking he had successfully educated her about military life. "Exactly. Now, why don't you run along and tell your boyfriend that Chief Webb gave you a proper introduction to how things work around here?" Sarah smiled slightly. "I'll be sure to mention our conversation to the appropriate people." "Good girl." Webb stepped aside finally, gesturing grandly toward the parking lot exit. "And maybe next time you'll think twice before wandering into places where you don't belong." As Sarah walked away, she could hear the sailors congratulating Webb on handling the situation. Their laughter followed her across the parking lot, along with a few more comments about teaching civilians their place and keeping the riffraff out. Sarah continued toward the administrative building, her mind already working through the implications of what had just happened. In less than 10 minutes, She had gained valuable insight into the base culture, identified several personnel who might resist her leadership, and confirmed some of the challenges Admiral Morrison had warned her about. She also knew that in approximately 48 hours, when she officially took command of Naval Base San Diego, that same group of sailors would be standing at attention in dress whites while she was introduced as their new commanding officer. The thought brought a small smile to her lips as she climbed the steps to begin her informal reconnaissance of her new command. The next day, Sarah decided to continue her informal observation by visiting the base mess hall during lunch. She had spent the previous afternoon in meetings with the administrative staff, carefully avoiding any areas where she might encounter Webb's group again before she was ready. Today, she wore different civilian clothes, khaki pants and a navy polo shirt, but still nothing that would identify her rank or position. The mess hall was buzzing with activity when she entered. Sailors in both uniform and civilian clothes filled the long tables, their conversations creating a steady hum of voices mixed with the clatter of trays and silverware. Sarah grabbed a tray and joined the lunch line, observing the interactions around her. She noticed Webb immediately. He was holding court at a corner table with his usual group, plus 2 additional sailors she hadn't seen the day before. His voice carried over the general noise as he regaled them with what she quickly realized was an embellished version of their encounter. "So this little princess walks up like she owns the place," Webb was saying, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. "Probably never worked a day in her life, but she's got attitude for days, acting like we should just step aside and let her waltz through our base." Sarah collected her meal, a simple sandwich and salad, and chose a table within earshot but not close enough to make her presence obvious. She opened a book she had brought along, using it as cover while she listened. "What did you do?" asked one of the new sailors, a young petty officer who looked genuinely interested in Webb's story. "What do you think I did?" Webb leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "I gave her a proper education about military life. Explained how things work around here, how we don't tolerate disrespect from civilians who think they can just walk into our house and act like they belong." "Good for you, Chief," said the red-haired sailor from the day before. "These base groupies are getting more and more bold. They think because they're dating some officer, they can go anywhere they want." Sarah noted the term base groupies and filed it away as another indication of the attitudes she would need to address. She continued eating while listening to the conversation evolve. "The thing is," Webb continued, warming to his theme, "these girls don't understand what we go through. They see the uniform and think it's all parades and ceremonies. They don't know about the 18-hour days, the deployments, the real sacrifice that goes into serving this country." A few other sailors at nearby tables had begun listening to Webb's speech. Sarah could see that he enjoyed having an audience and was building momentum. "I've been in the Navy for 15 years, he declared, his voice rising slightly. "Started as a seaman recruit and worked my way up to chief through blood, sweat, and pure determination. Every rank I've earned, every responsibility I've been given, came from proving myself over and over again. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let some civilian girl waltz in here and act like she deserves the same respect." One of the younger sailors raised his hand tentatively. "But Chief, what if she was just visiting someone? Maybe she wasn't trying to be disrespectful." Webb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Son, let me tell you something. Respect isn't about intention, it's about understanding your place. That girl needed to learn that this base isn't her playground, and I made sure she understood that message loud and clear." Sarah watched the young sailor nod reluctantly, clearly accepting Webb's authority, even if he didn't seem entirely comfortable with the approach. She made a mental note about the sailor's name tag, Petty Officer Johnson, and his apparent willingness to question authority when he felt something might be wrong. "The problem," Webb continued, "is that too many people these days think they can just show up anywhere and demand to be treated like they matter. The military doesn't work that way. We have hierarchy for a reason. We have chain of command for a reason. And we have standards for a reason. Absolutely, agreed another sailor. Can't have random people thinking they can just walk around like they own the place. Webb nodded approvingly. Exactly. And mark my words, if that girl shows her face around here again, she'll get the same lesson. I don't care who she thinks she's dating or what kind of connections she thinks she has. On this base, respect is earned, not given. Sarah finished her sandwich while listening to the conversation shift to other topics. Upcoming deployments, weekend plans, complaints about new regulations. But Webb kept circling back to the theme of protecting the base from outsiders who didn't understand military culture. You know what really gets me, he said during a lull in the conversation, is when these civilians act like they know anything about military life. Like that girl yesterday. Acting all calm and collected when I was explaining reality to her, probably thought she was being smart, but she was just showing how clueless she really was. What do you mean? Asked Johnson. She kept agreeing with me, like she actually understood what I was telling her about sacrifice and service, but you could tell she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. No real comprehension of what any of it actually means. Sarah suppressed a slight smile at that assessment. Webb's interpretation of her responses revealed more about his assumptions than about her actual understanding of military life. The worst part, Webb continued, is that she'll probably go back to her boyfriend and tell him some sob story about how the mean sailors were picking on her, try to get us in trouble for doing our job and maintaining standards. This comment drew nods of agreement from several sailors, and Sarah realized this was a deeper concern than simple intimidation. These sailors genuinely believed they were protecting their base and their way of life from people who would undermine it. You think she'll complain? Asked the red-haired sailor. Webb shrugged confidently. Let her try. I've got 15 years of exemplary service record. I know every officer on this base, and they all know I don't cause trouble without good reason. Some civilian girl complaining about hurt feelings isn't going to override years of trust and proven performance. Sarah found this particularly interesting. Webb clearly felt secure in his position and his relationships with the base leadership. He wasn't acting out of insecurity about his job, but from a genuine belief that he was protecting something valuable. Besides, Webb added, what's she going to say? That I told her civilians need to show respect on a military base? That I explained how the Navy actually works? Any officer worth his salt would agree with everything I said. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the mess hall speakers. Attention all personnel. This is a reminder that the change of command ceremony will take place tomorrow at 1400 hours on the parade grounds. All available personnel are encouraged to attend to welcome our new commanding officer. A ripple of conversation spread through the mess hall as sailors discussed the upcoming ceremony. Sarah listened with interest to their reactions. Wonder what the new CO will be like, said Johnson. Hopefully better than Morrison, Webb replied. That man was too soft on the civilian contractors and their families. Let them get away with way too much around here. You think the new one will be stricter? Asked another sailor. Webb leaned forward conspiratorially. I heard it's some hotshot from the Pentagon. Probably never served on a real base, just pushed papers in Washington, but at least headquarters types usually understand the importance of maintaining proper protocols. Sarah noted his assumption about her background and wondered how accurate the base rumor mill had been about her assignment. What's his name again? Asked the red-haired sailor. Admiral Chen, Webb replied. Don't know much else about him, but the name sounds foreign. Probably some diversity hire trying to make the brass look progressive. The casual prejudice in Webb's comment drew uncomfortable silence from some of the younger sailors, though others nodded agreement. Sarah filed this away as another issue she would need to address, though she noted with some satisfaction that not everyone at the table seemed comfortable with that kind of talk. Well, whoever it is, Webb concluded, I hope he understands that this base runs smoothly because we maintain standards. The last thing we need is some administrator coming in here and messing with systems that work." As the lunch period began winding down, sailors started clearing their tables and heading back to their duties. Webb's group lingered longer than most, clearly enjoying their informal leadership role in the mess hall dynamics. "You know what I'm going to do," Webb announced as they prepared to leave. "I'm going to make sure I'm front and center at that ceremony tomorrow. New commanding officer needs to see that this base has senior enlisted personnel who take pride in maintaining proper military bearing and standards." "Good idea, Chief," agreed one of his followers. "Show him right from the start that we're the kind of sailors who keep things running the right way." Webb stood up and straightened his civilian clothes with military precision. "Exactly. And if I see that girl from yesterday anywhere near the ceremony, I'm going to make sure security knows we've got a civilian wandering around where she doesn't belong." As the group left the mess hall, Sarah remained at her table for a few more minutes, processing what she had observed. Tomorrow's ceremony was going to be more interesting than anyone expected, and she found herself looking forward to Webb's reaction when he discovered exactly who the new commanding officer really was. She gathered her tray and book, already planning how she would address the various issues she had identified during her 2 days of observation. The ceremony would mark the beginning of her official command, but the real work of leadership would start immediately afterward. The morning of the change of command ceremony dawned clear and bright. Sarah stood in her quarters adjusting her dress white uniform in the mirror. The gold stripes on her sleeves caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window, 4 thick stripes with a star above them, marking her rank as Admiral. Her ribbons were precisely arranged on her chest, representing 15 years of distinguished service, including 2 combat deployments and multiple commendations for leadership excellence. She had requested that her official photograph and biography not be displayed around the base prior to the ceremony, preferring to make her introduction in person. Now she understood that this decision had been even more valuable than she had originally planned. At 13:30 hours, Sarah made her way to the parade ground where base personnel were assembling in formation. She entered through a side entrance, joining the small group of visiting officers and VIPs who would be seated on the platform. Admiral Morrison was already there, along with several other senior officers from the regional command. From her position on the platform, Sarah had a clear view of the assembled personnel. The entire base complement was present, nearly 3,000 sailors, officers, and civilian personnel arranged in perfect military formation. She quickly spotted Webb's familiar figure in the front row of the senior enlisted section, his chest puffed out with pride as he stood at rigid attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the ceremony coordinator, "please rise for the posting of the colors." The base honor guard marched onto the field with crisp precision, carrying the American flag and the Navy flag. Sarah stood with the rest of the platform party, her hand over her heart during the national anthem. She noticed several sailors in the formation glancing toward the platform, trying to identify the new commanding officer among the visiting officials. Admiral Morrison stepped to the podium first, beginning the traditional change of command ceremony with remarks about the base's mission and achievements during his tenure. Sarah listened while continuing to observe the formation, noting the body language and attention level of different sections. "It has been my honor to serve as commanding officer of Naval Base San Diego for the past 3 years, Morrison said. "This base represents the finest traditions of naval service, maintained by the dedication and professionalism of every sailor, officer, and civilian who calls it home." Sarah saw Webb nodding approvingly at these words, clearly pleased with the recognition of the base's standards and traditions. "Today," Morrison continued, "I have the privilege of transferring command to an officer of exceptional qualifications and proven leadership. Our new commanding officer brings extensive operational experience, advanced education, and a distinguished record of service to this position." The ceremony coordinator approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the new commanding officer of Naval Base San Diego, Admiral Sarah Chen. Sarah rose from her chair and walked to the podium with measured steps. A murmur rippled through the formation as personnel realized the new commanding officer was a woman, and a relatively young one at that. She could see surprise on many faces, but her attention was focused primarily on Webb's section. Webb's face had gone through a rapid transformation, from confident anticipation to confusion to dawning recognition. His mouth fell open slightly as he processed what he was seeing. The other sailors in his group were looking back and forth between Webb and the podium, clearly remembering his predictions about the new commander. Sarah accepted the microphone and looked out over the formation before speaking. When she did, her voice carried clearly across the parade ground with the authority and confidence of 15 years of command experience. Thank you, Admiral Morrison, for that introduction and for your outstanding leadership of this base. I am honored to accept command of Naval Base San Diego and to serve alongside the exceptional men and women assembled here today. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the formation. When her eyes reached Webb's section, she made brief but direct eye contact with him. His face had now gone completely pale, and she could see his mind racing as he processed the implications. Over the past few days, Sarah continued, I have had the opportunity to observe this base and its personnel in action. I have been impressed by the dedication, professionalism, and pride that I have witnessed at every level. Several officers on the platform nodded approvingly, but Sarah noticed that Webb looked like he might be sick. I have also had the chance to experience firsthand the strong sense of community and protective instinct that exists here. Personnel at all levels have demonstrated their commitment to maintaining the standards and traditions that make this base an outstanding example of naval excellence. This comment drew some confused looks from the audience, though most assumed it was a reference to routine observations during her transition briefings. Military service, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, requires sacrifice, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than ourselves. Every person in this formation has chosen to serve their country, and that choice deserves respect, regardless of rank, experience level, or how long someone has been part of this community. Webb was now visibly sweating despite the cool morning air. Several of his companions had noticed his distress and were shooting him questioning looks. I believe strongly in the chain of command, in military discipline, and in the importance of earned respect. I also believe that true leadership means setting an example of the values we expect others to follow, including how we treat those who may be new to our community or different from ourselves. Sarah paused again, this time letting her gaze linger on Webb's group for a moment longer than necessary. During my time in command, I will expect every member of this base to uphold the highest standards of military bearing, professional conduct, and personal integrity. This includes how we interact with fellow service members, civilian personnel, visitors, and anyone else who has legitimate business on this base. The ceremony continued with the traditional reading of orders and transfer of command authority. Sarah signed the appropriate documents while Webb stood frozen in formation, clearly trying to figure out how much trouble he might be in. When the formal portion concluded, Admiral Morrison stepped back to the microphone for the traditional introduction of the new commander to the assembled personnel. Base personnel, I present to you your new commanding officer, Admiral Sarah Chen. Admiral Chen graduated from the Naval Academy 15 years ago, where she was first in her class and commander of the brigade. She has served on destroyers in the Pacific Fleet, commanded a guided missile cruiser during 2 combat deployments, and most recently served as Deputy Director of Fleet Operations at the Pentagon. Sarah listened to her official biography being read, watching the formation's reaction to learning about her qualifications and experience. She noticed that many of the younger sailors looked impressed and perhaps a bit intimidated, while some of the senior personnel seemed to be reassessing their initial assumptions. Admiral Chen holds a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown University and is a graduate of the Navy War College. Her decorations include the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal, and the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V for Valor. When Morrison finished, Sarah stepped forward for her first official remarks as commanding officer. Thank you all for that warm welcome. I look forward to working with each of you to maintain and enhance the outstanding reputation of Naval Base San Diego. My door is always open to any member of this command who needs guidance, has suggestions for improvement, or wants to discuss how we can better serve our mission. She paused and smiled slightly. I should mention that I have already begun getting acquainted with base personnel during my transition period. Some of you may have encountered me around the base over the past few days while I was conducting informal observations. I want to thank everyone who took the time to share their perspectives on military life and base operations with me. Webb looked like he was about to pass out. Several people in his section were now staring at him as they began to put the pieces together. Those conversations, Sarah continued, have given me valuable insight into the culture and dynamics of this base. They have helped me understand both the strengths we need to build upon and the areas where we might need to make some adjustments to ensure we are living up to our full potential as a military organization. The ceremony concluded with the traditional honors and the dismissal of the formation. As personnel began to disperse, Sarah could see Webb standing paralyzed while his companions peppered him with urgent whispers. She made her way down from the platform, stopping to shake hands with various officers and senior enlisted personnel who approached to introduce themselves. After several minutes of these formal interactions, she noticed that Webb's group had not moved from their position. Webb himself appeared to be engaged in an intense, whispered conference with his followers. Sarah decided it was time to address the situation directly. She walked across the parade ground toward the group, her approach noticed by dozens of other personnel who slowed their departure to observe. "Chief Petty Officer Webb," she said clearly as she approached. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Webb snapped to attention so quickly he nearly lost his balance. "Yes, ma'am. Admiral, ma'am." The other sailors in his group stood at attention as well, looking nervous and uncertain. "At ease," Sarah said calmly. She looked directly at Webb, who was now sweating profusely. "I wanted to thank you for the orientation you provided me the other day. It was very educational." "Ma'am, I didn't realize... I would never have..." Webb stammered. His usual confidence completely evaporated. "You didn't realize I was a military officer?" Sarah finished for him. "I understand. I was dressed in civilian clothes, and you made reasonable assumptions based on what you observed." Webb nodded miserably, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop. "However," Sarah continued, "I think our conversation revealed some important things about how this base operates that we should probably discuss further. Would you be available to meet with me in my office tomorrow morning at 0800 hours? "Yes, ma'am." "Absolutely, ma'am," Webb replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent. And Chief?" Sarah's tone remained professional, but carried a subtle edge. "I'd like you to think tonight about whether the assumptions you made about me might apply to how we treat other people who visit this base." "We'll discuss that tomorrow as well." "Yes, ma'am, I will, ma'am." Sarah nodded to the group. "Gentlemen, congratulations on an outstanding ceremony. Your military bearing during the formation was exemplary." As she walked away, Sarah could hear excited whispers breaking out behind her as the sailors processed what had just happened. She knew that by evening, the story would have spread throughout the entire base, probably with multiple embellished versions. More importantly, she knew that her first real test as commanding officer had begun. How she handled the Webb situation would set the tone for her entire command and demonstrate whether she could balance accountability with leadership, discipline with fairness. As she headed toward her new office to begin the real work of command, Sarah reflected on the valuable lessons the past few days had taught her. Sometimes the best intelligence came from the most unexpected sources, and the most important conversations happened when people didn't know they were being evaluated. Tomorrow's meeting with Chief Webb would be the first step in addressing the cultural issues she had identified, but it would need to be handled carefully to achieve lasting change rather than just punitive action. She had work to do, and she was ready to begin.